The mahogany doors of the courtroom didn't just open, they loomed like the gates of judgment. Inside, Derek casually checked his Rolex, already counting the millions he was about to steal from the woman who had built his empire. He sat beside his high-priced shark of a lawyer, smirking at the empty chair across the aisle. He had told his wife to leave with nothing. Not a dime, not a chaotic shred of dignity. He thought she was a helpless, penniless orphan with nowhere to turn. He was wrong. The silence in the room was about to be shattered by the footsteps of a man who could buy and sell Derek 10 times over. The poor wife had a secret, and it was walking through the door wearing a $5,000 suit. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the penthouse apartment, like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Laurel stood by the kitchen island, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the cold marble edge. She stared at the man she had called her husband for 7 years. Derek was pacing the living room, his Italian leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He didn't look at her. He was too busy adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit, examining himself in the hallway mirror with an air of supreme arrogance. "I don't want to drag this out, Laurel," Derek said, his voice smooth and detached, as if he were discussing a minor shipping error at his logistics company, rather than the end of their marriage. "My lawyer has drawn up the papers. It's a clean break. You leave, I stay. The business stays with me. The accounts stay with me. The penthouse obviously stays with me." Laurel felt a lump form in her throat, hot and suffocating. "Derek, we built this together. When we met, you were working out of a garage. I did the books. I drove the delivery vans when your drivers quit. I put every cent of my savings into the down payment for your first warehouse." Derek finally turned to face her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He walked over to the table where a thick stack of legal documents lay waiting. "Correction," he said, picking up a pen and twirling it between his fingers. "You were a secretary. You answered phones and made coffee. I was the visionary. I was the one who secured the contracts with Amazon and FedEx. You were just there. And frankly, you've become a liability. You don't fit the image of Apex Global anymore." He tossed a folder toward her. It slid across the marble and stopped inches from her hand. "What is this?" she whispered. "A settlement offer," Derek said, checking his watch again. $5,000. Enough for a deposit on a rental somewhere, elsewhere, and a bus ticket to wherever you came from. Take it, sign the NDA, and disappear. If you fight me. Mr. Prescott will bury you in legal fees until you're living under a bridge. You know he's never lost a divorce case." Laurel looked at the folder, then back at him. $5,000, Derek. Our company is valued at $40 million. "My company," he corrected, his voice hardening. "And you have no proof of ownership, no shares, no title. Just a marriage certificate that's about to be shredded. You were a nobody when I found you, Laurel. An orphan with a fake degree and a tragic backstory. I gave you a life. Now I'm taking it back." The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just the greed. It was the erasure of her existence. He was rewriting history to suit his new narrative, one where he was the self-made god, and she was just a leech he had finally scraped off his shoe. "Is this because of her?" Laurel asked softly. Derek didn't flinch. "If you mean Tiffany, then yes. She understands the world I live in now. She's a model, Laurel. She looks the part on the red carpet. You look like... well, you look tired." He walked to the door, grabbing his coat. I'm going to the office. By the time I get back tonight, I want you and your things gone. Sign the papers, leave the keys on the counter, and take the check. Don't make me call security to escort you out of my own home." The door slammed shut, leaving Laurel alone in the silent, expansive luxury she had helped create. She stood there for a long time, the sound of the rain filling the void. He thought she was weak. He thought she was alone in the world. He believed the lie she had told him 7 years ago, that she was Laurel Hart, a poor girl from Ohio, with no family and no connections. She walked over to the folder, opened it, and looked at the pathetic check for $5,000. A tear escaped her eye, but she angrily wiped it away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn burner phone she kept hidden in the bottom of her knitting bag. She had promised herself she would never turn it on again. She had walked away from that life to find something real, something she earned herself. But Derek had destroyed real. Her fingers shook as she dialed a number she hadn't called in a decade. It rang once, twice. "Ventura Holdings, CEO's office," a crisp female voice answered. "How may I direct your call? I need to speak to Lucas," Laurel said, her voice stealing. "I'm afraid Mr. Kensington is in a board meeting and cannot be disturbed." "Tell him it's his sister," Laurel interrupted, her voice dropping an octave. "Tell him Laurel has come home, and tell him I need the best shark he has." 3 weeks had passed since Laurel left the penthouse. She was currently staying in a modest extended-stay motel on the outskirts of the city. The wallpaper was peeling and the smell of stale cigarettes permeated the hallway, a stark contrast to the lavender-scented air of the penthouse. But Laurel didn't mind. For the first time in years, she felt awake. She sat at a small, wobbly table, staring at the man sitting opposite her. He didn't fit the room. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than the entire motel. He had silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and an aura of absolute terrifying competence. This was Arthur Sterling. No, wait, not Sterling. This was Arthur Penhaligon, the most feared corporate litigator in New York, flown in specifically for her. "Let me get this straight," Arthur said, reviewing the file Derek's lawyer had sent over. "He is offering a nuisance settlement of $5,000, claiming you made 0 financial contribution to the marriage, and he has frozen the joint accounts." "That's correct," Laurel said, sipping a cup of cheap motel coffee. "And he believes you are Laurel Hart, a community college dropout from Ohio." "Yes." Arthur closed the folder and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator spotting a wounded gazelle. "Mrs. Kensington." "Excuse me, Mrs. Hart. In my 40 years of practicing law, I have seen stupidity. I have seen arrogance. But I have never seen a man construct his own coffin with such enthusiasm." "He has a pit bull," Laurel warned. "Roger Prescott. He's nasty. He plays dirty. He'll try to paint me as a gold digger." "Prescott is a golden retriever puppy compared to what is coming," Arthur said dismissively. "But we have to play this carefully. Lucas was very specific. He wants Derek to believe he has won until the very last second. He wants the fall to be absolute." Laurel looked down at her hands. "I don't want his money, Arthur. I really don't. I have my own money, or I will once the trust unlocks. I just want him to admit what he did. I want him to admit I built that company." "Justice." Arthur nodded. "A noble pursuit. But in my experience, justice is best served with a side of total financial ruin for the opposing party. Now tomorrow is the preliminary hearing. Prescott will try to intimidate you. He will try to get you to sign the waiver. You will say nothing. You will let me speak, and you will look terrified. Can you do that?" "I don't have to act," Laurel muttered. "It is terrifying. He knows all the judges in Seattle. He plays golf with them." "He plays golf with Judge Henderson," Arthur corrected. "Judge Henderson is currently under investigation for bribery, though he doesn't know it yet. But tomorrow we have Judge Walters. She is a stickler for procedure, and she hates bullies." Just then, Laurel's phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek. "Don't bother showing up tomorrow unless it's to sign. Tiffany and I are looking at vacation homes in Como. Need this wrapped up. Don't be pathetic." Laurel showed the phone to Arthur. Arthur read it and chuckled dryly. "Lake Como. Lovely this time of year. I believe your family owns a villa there, right next to the Clooneys." "2 villas," Laurel corrected, "but we haven't been in years." "Well," Arthur stood up, smoothing his jacket, "let's make sure Derek never gets closer to Italy than an Olive Garden." The preliminary hearing was held in a small, sterile conference room at the courthouse. The air conditioning was humming loudly, but it did nothing to cool the tension in the room. Derek sat at the head of the table, flanked by Roger Prescott and a junior associate. Derek looked immaculate, glowing with the health of a man who spent his weekends at spas and his weekdays crushing competitors. Beside him sat Tiffany. She wasn't supposed to be there. It was highly irregular for a mistress to attend a divorce deposition, but Derek clearly wanted to twist the knife. Tiffany was stunning, 22 years old, with blonde extensions and a pout that suggested she was bored by the concept of poverty. She was scrolling through Instagram, occasionally popping gum. Laurel sat on the opposite side, wearing a simple grey dress she had bought at a thrift store. She wore no makeup. She looked small, defeated. Arthur sat beside her, silent, reading a newspaper. "Let's get this over with," Prescott barked, slamming a hand on the table. He was a large man with a red face and a loud tie. "My client is a generous man. He has increased the offer to $10,000. That is charity, Mrs. Hart. Pure charity. You have no legal standing. The prenuptial agreement—" "There is no prenuptial agreement," Arthur said softly, not looking up from his paper. "We have a verbal contract," Prescott blustered, "and we have witnesses who will testify that Laurel Hart married Mr. Reynolds under false pretenses. She claimed to have business acumen. She was a fraud. She provided no value to Apex Global." Derek leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Laurel. "Laurel, look at yourself. You're pathetic, dragging this out. For what you think a judge is going to give you half my company. I built Apex. Me. I worked the late nights while you— What did you do? You knitted. You cooked. I did the accounting, Derek," Laurel said, her voice trembling. "I found the tax loopholes that saved you $3 million in 2022. I negotiated the union contracts." Tiffany laughed. It was a high, tinkling sound. "Babe, she thinks she's a businesswoman. That's so cute. Did she help you pick out your ties too?" "She has delusions of grandeur," Derek sneered. "Listen to me, Laurel. If you don't sign this today, though I'm going to sue you for fraud, I will claim you stole corporate funds. I will ruin your name so badly you won't be able to get a job scrubbing toilets." Arthur finally folded his newspaper. He took off his reading glasses and looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Mr. Reynolds," Arthur said, "you seem very confident for a man who is currently leveraging his company's assets to fund a lifestyle he cannot afford." Derek's face went red. "Excuse me. Who is this geriatric dinosaur?" "My name is Mr. Penhaligon," Arthur said, "and I would advise you to speak to your wife with a modicum of respect, because right now she is the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment for tax evasion." The room went silent. Prescott's eyes widened. He knew the name Penhaligon. "You're bluffing," Prescott stuttered. "Penhaligon practices in New York. He doesn't handle low-level divorces in Seattle. I make exceptions for special cases," Arthur said. "We decline the $10,000. In fact, we decline any settlement. We will see you in open court on Monday. And Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you enjoy your weekend. It will be your last one as a free man." Derek laughed, a loud barking sound. "You're insane. Both of you. See you in court. I'm going to destroy you, Laurel. I'm going to leave you with nothing." Derek stood up, grabbed Tiffany's hand, and stormed out. Prescott lingered for a second, looking at Arthur with a flicker of fear, then followed his client. When the door closed, Laurel let out a breath she had been holding for 20 minutes. She was shaking. "He's so sure of himself," she whispered. "Confidence is the food of the wise man, but the liquor of the fool," Arthur quoted, "and Mr. Reynolds is drunk on it." Arthur's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then smiled. "That was Lucas," Arthur said to Laurel. "He just landed at SeaTac Airport, and he brought them the files. The original funding documents for Apex Global," Arthur said. "The ones that prove the initial capital didn't come from Derek's savings. It came from an anonymous angel investor back in 2017. Laurel smiled for the first time in weeks. "Me." "You," Arthur agreed. "Using your trust fund allowance routed through 3 shell companies so he wouldn't know you were rich. You funded him, Laurel. You own 80% of the initial equity. And Monday we remind him who the boss really is." The motel parking lot was a cracked slab of concrete that usually hosted rusted pickup trucks and weary sedans. But that Sunday night, the residents of the Starlight Inn were peering through their blinds in confusion. A caravan of 3 black Cadillac Escalades had pulled up idling silently in the rain. Inside room 204, Laurel sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, watching the headlights sweep across the peeling floral wallpaper. She felt a mix of relief and nausea. She hadn't seen him in 10 years, not since she ran away from the Kensington estate in Martha's Vineyard, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of her family's dynasty. She wanted to be Laurel, not the heiress. So, she wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the 9 zeros in her father's bank account. And look where that had gotten her. Betrayed by a man she saved from bankruptcy, living in a motel, about to go to war. There was a firm, rhythmic knock at the door. Not the frantic pounding of room service or a landlord, but the confident rap of authority. Laurel opened it. Standing there, flanked by 2 mountains of security men holding umbrellas, was Lucas Kensington. He looked older than she remembered. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by the hardened edge of a man who ran a multinational conglomerate. He wore a navy coat that fit him like armor. "Laurel," he said. His voice was deep, steady. "Lucas," she whispered. He didn't smile. He stepped inside his eyes, scanning the cramped, musty room with a look of suppressed rage. He took in the cheap kitchenette, the flickering TV, the threadbare carpet. When his eyes landed back on his sister, the hardness in his face fractured. He pulled her into a hug that knocked the wind out of her. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into his coat, which smelled of cedar and expensive scotch. "I'm so sorry I left." "Hush," Lucas said, stroking her hair. "You wanted a life. You wanted to find your own way. I respected that. But if I had known you were living with a parasite like Reynolds, I would have bought his company and fired him 5 years ago." He pulled away and held her shoulders. "Arthur told me everything. You funded Apex Global, the Angel of the West investor. Laurel nodded, wiping her eyes. I used the Cayman Trust Mom left me. I routed it through a shell company in Singapore, then to a venture firm in Delaware. I didn't want Derek to know. He was so proud. He wanted to be a self-made man. If he knew his wife was bankrolling him, it would have destroyed his ego. Lucas laughed, a dark, humorless sound. So instead, you let him believe he was a genius, while you quietly paid for his warehouses, his trucks, and his inventory. You created a monster Lids. I did it for love, she said softly, and he repaid you with an eviction notice and a check for $5,000. Lucas finished. He walked over to the wobbly table where Arthur Penhaligon was already laying out documents. Arthur stood up. Good to see you, Lucas. The team is ready. The forensic accountants have been working for 48 hours straight, Lucas said, loosening his tie. We found it. The trail is complex, but it's undeniable. Derek thinks he's clever because he cooks the books to hide assets from the IRS. But he's sloppy. He didn't account for the digital footprint of the original transfers. Lucas tossed a thick, leather-bound dossier onto the table. This proves that every single asset Apex Global owns, from the logistics software to the coffee machine in the break room, can be traced back to the Kensington Family Trust. Legally, Derek Reynolds doesn't own a company. He is an employee who has been embezzling from the majority shareholder. Laurel looked at the dossier. So we just show this to the judge? No. Arthur interjected, his eyes gleaming. If we show it now, he settles. He runs. He hides money in crypto or offshore accounts we can't touch. We need him to commit perjury first. Perjury? Laurel asked. We need him to get on that stand tomorrow and swear under oath that he built the company alone. Lucas explained, his voice icy. We need him to deny your involvement on the record. Once he lies to the court, we don't just take the company, Laurel. We send him to prison. Lucas walked to the window, looking out at the rain. He told you to leave with nothing. Tomorrow, we grant his wish. But the nothing won't be yours. It will be his. The King County Courthouse was a maze of marble and mahogany, designed to make people feel small. But Derek Reynolds walked through the halls like he owned the building. He was wearing a new suit, a lighter shade of grey, tailored to accentuate his shoulders. Tiffany was absent today. Prescott had advised that bringing a mistress to the actual trial was bad optics, but her presence was felt in Derek's smirk. He had texted Laurel that morning, last chance to take the 10K. Offer expires at noon. Laurel didn't reply. She sat at the defense table looking even more fragile than before. She wore a black cardigan that seemed too big for her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She kept her head down. To the casual observer, she looked like a beaten woman accepting her fate. Derek's lawyer, Roger Prescott, began his opening statement with theatrical flair. Your Honor, Prescott boomed, pacing in front of Judge Walters. This case is simple. It is a tragedy, yes, but a simple one. We have a successful self-made man, Mr. Derek Reynolds, who lifted a woman out of poverty. He gave her a home, a life of luxury. And now, as the marriage dissolves due to irreconcilable differences, this woman who has never worked a day in the corporate world demands half of his empire. It is greed, plain and simple. Prescott pointed a thick finger at Laurel. We will prove that Laurel Hart, or whatever name she goes by, was nothing more than a domestic partner. She contributed 0 capital, 0 intellectual property, 0 labor. To award her equity in Apex Global would be an insult to every entrepreneur who has pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Judge Walters, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at the defense table. Mr. Penhaligon, your opening. Arthur stood up slowly. He didn't pace. He didn't boom. He spoke in a conversational tone that forced everyone to lean in. We reserve our opening for later, Your Honor. We prefer to let the facts speak. The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Very well. Mr. Prescott, call your first witness. Derek took the stand. He looked the part of the aggrieved genius. He answered Prescott's questions with practiced ease. Tell the court, Mr. Reynolds, how you started Apex Global, Prescott asked. Derek sighed, a look of faux humility on his face. It was 2017. I was working 3 jobs. I saved every penny. I ate ramen noodles for 2 years. I took $50,000 of my own hard-earned cash and bought my first van. I drove it myself. I did the sales during the day and the deliveries at night. It was blood, sweat, and tears. And your wife? Prescott asked. What was she doing? She was home, Derek said, shaking his head. She had some personal issues. Anxiety. She couldn't hold down a job. I told her not to worry, that I would take care of everything. I tried to involve her, I really did. I asked her to help with filing, but she just couldn't handle the pressure. So I let her stay home and knit. I just wanted her to be happy. Laurel gripped the edge of the table. The lie was so smooth, so complete. He had erased the nights she stayed up until 400 a.m., reconciling the bank accounts, because he couldn't do math to save his life. He erased the time she negotiated the lease on the warehouse when the landlord refused to talk to Derek. So to be clear, Prescott said, looking at the court reporter to ensure this was transcribed perfectly. Did Laurel Hart contribute any financial assets to the founding or operation of Apex Global? None, Derek said firmly. Not a dime. She didn't have any money to contribute. She was penniless when I met her. And did she contribute any labor management decision-making? No. Derek smiled. Laurel is a sweet girl, but she doesn't have a head for business. She wouldn't know a balance sheet from a grocery list. Objection, Arthur called out, though he sounded bored. Speculation on my client's intelligence. Sustained, Judge Walters said. Stick to the facts, Mr. Reynolds. The fact is, Derek continued, looking directly at Laurel with cold, dead eyes, I built this, alone. It is mine. No further questions, Prescott said, sitting down with a satisfied thump. Arthur Penhaligon stood up. He didn't pick up any papers. He just walked to the podium and looked at Derek for a long, uncomfortable minute. Mr. Reynolds, Arthur began, you stated you used $50,000 of your own savings to start the company in 2017. Which bank was that savings account with? Derek blinked. I believe it was Chase. Or maybe Wells Fargo. It was a long time ago. I dealt with a lot of cash tips from my previous job. Cash, Arthur repeated. So there is no paper trail. It was savings, Derek snapped. I kept it in a safe. I see. And you stated my client, Mrs. Reynolds, has no business acumen. That she is, how did you put it? Sweet but simple. I didn't say simple, I said she doesn't know business, Derek corrected. Is it true, Mr. Reynolds, that in 2019, Apex Global faced a severe audit by the IRS regarding the classification of your drivers as independent contractors? Derek stiffened. Yes, standard procedure. And who handled that audit? Arthur asked. Your lawyers. I handled it. Derek lied. Really? Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Because I have here an affidavit from the IRS agent in charge, a Mr. Timothy Clark. He states that he met exclusively with a Mrs. Laurel Reynolds for 3 days, and that her extensive knowledge of tax code 530 is the only reason you weren't fined $2 million. Derek paled slightly. I prepped her. I told her what to say. You prepped her on tax code 530. Arthur smiled. Miss Reynolds, can you tell the court what tax code 530 refers to? Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. He began to sweat. It's about employees. It's about safe harbor provisions for worker classification, Arthur corrected. Something my client seems to know intimately, yet you, the sole genius, do not. This is irrelevant, Prescott shouted, standing up. Whether she talked to an auditor doesn't mean she owns the company. True, Arthur said. Ownership is proven by capital, by money. Arthur turned back to Derek. You are under oath, Mr. Reynolds. I will ask you one last time. Did you receive any outside funding to start Apex Global? Derek hesitated. He looked at Prescott, who nodded slightly. Stick to the story. No, Derek said. I did not. Arthur nodded. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. You may step down. As Derek walked back to his seat, he whispered to Prescott. What is he doing? That was weak. He's grasping at straws, Prescott whispered back. He has nothing. We've won. Arthur Penhaligon turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense calls its first and only witness. We call Mr. Lucas Kensington to the stand. A murmur went through the courtroom. The name Kensington was known. It was on the side of hospitals, museums, and the tallest skyscraper in Seattle. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The air in the courtroom was stale recycled and thick with the tension of a battle that felt prematurely ended. Derek Reynolds sat back in his chair, smoothing the lapels of his suit with a satisfied exhale. He had done it. He had looked the judge in the eye, told the lie that cemented his legacy, and walked away unscathed. His lawyer, Roger Prescott, leaned over, covering his mouth with a hand to hide his smug grin. Textbook, Derek. Absolute textbook. Penhaligon is drowning. He's got nothing but a sad story and a client who looks like she shops at Goodwill. We'll be out of here by noon. Derek glanced across the aisle. Laurel was staring at her hands, her shoulders hunched. She looked small, defeated. Part of him felt a twinge of pity. She had been a good wife in her own limited way, but that pity was quickly swallowed by his ambition. She was an anchor, and he was a ship meant for the high seas. Your Honor, Arthur Penhaligon said, standing up. He moved slower this time, not with the lethargy of defeat, but with the deliberate pacing of a man setting a trap. He didn't pick up a notepad. He didn't look at his client. He looked at the back of the room. The defense calls its first and only witness, Arthur announced, his voice carrying a strange, resonant weight. We call Mr. Lucas Kensington to the stand. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. The court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Even the bailiff, who had been half asleep against the wall, straightened up. The name Kensington wasn't just a name in this city. It was an institution. It was on the side of the Children's Hospital, the Art Museum, and the tallest skyscraper on the skyline. Derek frowned, his brow furrowing. He leaned urgently toward Prescott. Kensington, the Ventura Holdings guy. What the hell is he doing here? Prescott looked equally baffled, flipping frantically through his case files. I have no idea. Maybe she worked for him. Did she ever mention a job as a housekeeper or an assistant? She never worked, Derek hissed. She sat at home and knitted. Order, Judge Walters said, though her gaze was fixed on the rear of the room. The heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They swung wide with a gravity that demanded attention. Lucas Kensington walked down the center aisle. He didn't walk like a witness terrified of cross-examination. He walked like a man coming to inspect a property he had already purchased. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy bespoke suit that made Derek's off-the-rack Italian jacket look like a costume. The air in the room seemed to change pressure, the oxygen sucked out by the sheer force of his presence. He passed the defense table without looking at Derek. He stepped up to the witness stand, raised his right hand and swore the oath. His voice was deep, steady, and devoid of nervousness. He sat down, unbuttoned his jacket, and rested his hands on the railing. Finally, he turned his head. His eyes locked onto Derek. It wasn't a glare. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, the kind a lion gives a hyena before breaking its neck. Arthur Penhaligon approached the stand. Please state your full name and occupation for the record. Lucas Alexander Kensington, the witness replied. I am the CEO and chairman of Ventura Holdings and the primary trustee of the Kensington family estate. Thank you, Mr. Kensington, Arthur said, resting a hand on the wooden railing. Let's cut right to the chase. Do you know the defendant, the woman sitting at that table? Lucas looked at Laurel. His expression softened instantly, the hardness melting into something protective and warm. I do, Lucas said. She is my sister. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical vacuum. Derek Reynolds dropped his expensive fountain pen. It clattered loudly on the floor, rolling away under the table, but he didn't move to retrieve it. He stared at Laurel. Laurel with the hole in her sweater. Laurel who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. Laurel. Kensington, his sister. Derek whispered, the color draining from his face. That's impossible. She's an orphan. She told me she was a poor orphan from Ohio. Order. Judge Walters banged her gavel, though she leaned forward, her eyes wide behind her glasses. Arthur continued, ignoring the disruption. Your sister. But the court records show her maiden name is Hart. Hart is our mother's maiden name, Lucas explained calmly, turning back to the judge. Laurel used it to distance herself from the family fortune when she left home 10 years ago. She wanted to live a normal life. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the 9 zeros in her father's bank account. Lucas's eyes drilled back into Derek, cold and unforgiving. She wanted to find a partner who would build a life with her, not just spend hers. Unfortunately, her experiment in humility failed. Derek felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Prescott was motionless beside him, his mouth slightly open. Mr. Kensington, Arthur said, walking back to the defense table. He picked up the heavy leather-bound dossier that had been sitting there all morning. He hefted it, letting the court feel its weight. Are you familiar with a company called Apex Global? Intimately, Lucas said. My venture capital firm, Blue Horizon, provided the seed funding for it in 2017. And who authorized that funding? Laurel did, Lucas stated clearly. In the spring of 2017, she petitioned the family trust to release $400,000 of her personal assets. She instructed us to route the money through Blue Horizon to a startup called Apex Global, founded by her husband. Did Mr. Reynolds know the money came from her? No, Lucas said. She gave strict instructions to keep her name off the transfer. She wanted him to feel like a success. She wanted him to have the pride of a self-made man. She labeled it as an angel investment with a silent partner agreement. Arthur handed the dossier to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. Judge Walters opened the file. The pages rustled loudly in the silent room. She flipped through bank transfer records, emails, and signed contracts. She stopped at a signature page, her eyebrows shooting up. "Your Honor," Arthur said, "this dossier contains the bank transfer records, the email authorization from Laurel Kensington, and the signed silent partner agreement. It lists Laurel as the 90% equity holder of the entity known as Apex Global." Derek was shaking his head violently now. No, this is fake. She's lying. She doesn't have that kind of money. She's a nobody. "Mr. Reynolds, sit down," Judge Walters barked her voice, cutting like a whip. She looked up from the file, staring at Derek with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Mr. Prescott, were you aware that your client's bootstrap story was funded by a trust fund?" "No, Your Honor, I swear," Prescott stammered, loosening his tie as sweat beaded on his forehead. "My client assured me. He told me he used cash savings. Mr. Kensington." Arthur continued, his voice rising over the panic at the plaintiff's table. "I have one final question. According to the bylaws of the silent partner agreement, specifically, Section 14, paragraph B. What are the consequences if the operating manager, in this case Mr. Reynolds, attempts to defraud the silent partner or claims real ownership in a court of law?" Lucas leaned into the microphone. The room held its breath. "Section 14, paragraph B is the bad faith clause," Lucas said, his voice echoing with finality. "If the operating manager acts in bad faith, attempts to deny the equity of the investor, or commits perjury regarding the company's origins, the silent protection is immediately voided." Lucas smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "Immediate control of the company reverts to the majority shareholder, and the operating manager is terminated for cause effective, immediately forfeiting all severance bonuses and unvested assets." Lucas looked at Derek, who was now trembling in his chair. "In layman's terms, Mr. Reynolds, you're fired. And since you just swore under oath 5 minutes ago that you built this company alone, you have also committed fraud against the court." Arthur Penhaligon turned to the empty jury box, then back to the judge. He closed his folder with a soft snap. "No further questions." The recess was supposed to last an hour, but to Derek Reynolds it felt like an eternity, suspended in a vacuum of rising panic. He sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a trapped fly. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and damp wool from the relentless storm outside. Derek stared at his phone. He had called Tiffany 5 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. On the 6th attempt, the line didn't even ring. The screen simply flashed. Call failed. She had blocked him. The realization hit him like a physical slap. The woman who had picked out engagement rings with him 2 days ago had vanished the moment the smell of money began to fade. 10 feet away, Roger Prescott was pacing frantically, his phone pressed to his sweaty ear. Derek could hear snippets of the hushed, desperate conversation. "Malpractice? I didn't know. He lied to me. Yes, the Kensington estate. I know who they are." Derek looked at the closed doors of the courtroom. Inside, his fate was being sealed. He thought of the penthouse, the heated floors, the view of the Space Needle, the way the concierges rushed to open doors for him. He had built an identity around being the man who had it all. Without it, who was he? Mr. Reynolds. "They're ready for you." The bailiff's voice was flat, devoid of sympathy. Derek stood up his legs, feeling like they were made of lead. He smoothed his suit jacket, a nervous tick he couldn't stop, and walked back into the arena. The courtroom felt different now. Before it had been a battleground. Now it felt like an execution chamber. The gallery was still empty, but the presence of the Kensington siblings filled the space. Laurel stood next to Arthur Penhaligon. The oversized, threadbare cardigan she had worn earlier was draped over the back of her chair. She stood in a simple, elegant black dress, her posture straight, her chin high. She didn't look at Derek. She looked through him. Judge Walters swept into the room, her black robes billowing. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't look at the court reporter. She looked directly at Derek. Her expression was a terrifying mix of disappointment and resolve. "Be seated," she commanded, though she remained standing. Derek sat his hands gripping the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Walters began, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "The court has reviewed the evidence submitted by Mr. Penhaligon, specifically the forensic financial trail originating from the Kensington Family Trust and terminating in the operating accounts of Apex Global." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "In civil court, the burden of proof is a preponderance of the evidence. However, what has been presented here today goes far beyond that. The documentation is irrefutable. It paints a clear picture of the company's origin, a picture that is diametrically opposed to the sworn testimony you gave less than 2 hours ago." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "You sat in that chair," she pointed to the witness stand, "and you spun a fable about a self-made man claiming sole ownership and dismissing your wife as a financial burden. You attempted to rewrite history, to defraud the very person who bankrolled your success. It is not just perjury, Mr. Reynolds. It is a profound moral failing." She picked up her gavel, weighing it in her hand. "I am issuing a summary judgment in favor of the defendant, Laurel Kensington Reynolds. The court declares that Apex Global and all its subsidiary assets are the intellectual and physical property of the silent majority shareholder, the Kensington Trust." Derek felt the room spin. "Your Honor, surely there is a middle ground." "There is no middle ground for fraud," Judge Walters snapped. "Furthermore, because you have been using company funds that legally belong to your wife to finance your personal lifestyle, I am granting the motion for immediate asset seizure." She looked down at a piece of paper. "The penthouse apartment, the vacation holdings, the investment accounts, even the vehicle you drove to this courthouse. These were purchased with misappropriated funds. You are ordered to vacate the primary residence within 24 hours. A forensic accounting team will arrive at the premises at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow to inventory the contents. You may take your clothing and personal toiletries. Everything else stays." "Wait," Derek cried out, standing up, despite Prescott grabbing his arm. "The car." "You can't take the car. It's pouring rain out there. How am I supposed to get home?" Judge Walters looked at him over the rim of her glasses. The look was withering. "Mr. Reynolds, you offered your wife $5,000 and a bus ticket. I suggest you acquaint yourself with the public transit system you felt was suitable for her." She brought the gavel down. Bang! "This court is adjourned. The transcripts will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review regarding criminal charges. Good day." The sound of the gavel lingered in the air like a gunshot. It was over. The empire wasn't just crumbling. It had been vaporized. Derek stood frozen as the judge exited. Prescott didn't even say goodbye. He shoved his papers into his briefcase and practically ran out the side door, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of his client. Derek turned slowly. Lucas and Laurel were gathering their things. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had nothing to worry about. Desperation clawed at Derek's throat. He rushed toward the railing. "Laurel Lids, wait!" Laurel paused. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. "Laurel, please." Derek stammered, his voice cracking. "We can talk about this. I was under so much pressure. The market, the investors. I lost my way. But we can fix this. I love you, baby. You know I love you. We built this life together. Don't throw 7 years away because of a bad lawyer." He reached out, trying to touch her hand, but Lucas stepped in between them. He was a wall of muscle and expensive wool. Laurel looked past her brother's shoulder, locking eyes with her husband. There was no anger in her gaze. There was no hate. There was something far worse, indifference. "You don't love me, Derek," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You never did. You loved the way I looked at you. You loved having someone in the front row clapping for your performance." She took a small step closer, her eyes searching his face one last time. "You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes. You thought it made you look like a king. But the mirror broke Derek. And now you're just a man, standing in an empty room." Derek stared at her, the truth of her words cutting deeper than any legal judgment. "Keys," Lucas said, his voice rough. He held out an open palm. "What?" Derek blinked. "The Escalade, and the office key card. Hand them over." Derek's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy fob and the plastic card. He dropped them into Lucas's hand. He felt lighter, but in a sickening, hollow way. Lucas pocketed the keys, then glanced down at Derek's wrist. He let out a short, dry laugh. "And Derek, you can keep the Rolex." Derek instinctively covered the watch with his other hand. This is worth 40,000. It's a fake," Lucas said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Laurel bought it for you on Canal Street for $200. She knew you couldn't tell the difference between quality and flash. It seemed fitting for you." Derek looked down at the gold band. He had flaunted this watch in boardrooms. He had shoved it in people's faces. Fake. Just like the degree he claimed to have. Just like his empire. Just like him. "Let's go," Lucas said, guiding Laurel toward the exit. Derek watched them walk away. He was alone. He pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out onto the portico. The weather had turned violent. The wind howled, driving sheets of freezing rain sideways. The sky was a bruised purple dark and unforgiving. He fumbled for his phone to call an Uber, only to see the notification credit card suspended. He tried the corporate card. Suspended. He looked up. At the curb, a sleek silver Rolls-Royce Phantom was idling. The rear door was open, and the interior glowed with warm amber light. A uniformed driver stood with a massive umbrella shielding Laurel as she stepped toward the vehicle. "Laurel!" Derek shouted over the wind, stepping out into the rain. The water soaked his suit instantly, plastering his hair to his skull. "Laurel, where are you going?" "What am I supposed to do?" Laurel paused with one foot inside the car. She looked back at him. He was shivering, drenched, a pathetic figure against the grey stone of the courthouse. "I'm going to Italy," she called out, her voice carrying clearly over the storm. "My family has a villa on Lake Como that needs some attention. I think the fresh air will do me good." "But what about me?" he screamed, the water running into his mouth. "You—" Laurel offered a faint final smile. "You're a self-made man, Derek. I'm sure you'll figure it out." She slipped into the leather seat. The heavy door closed with a solid, luxurious thud that shut out the world. The Rolls-Royce pulled away smoothly, its taillights dissolving into the mist. Derek stood on the curb water, pooling in his Italian leather shoes, clutching a fake watch, with the realization that the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was knowing that the person who had given him everything had finally realized he was worth nothing. Across the street, a city bus screeched to a halt, splashing a wave of muddy gutter water onto his legs. The doors hissed open, waiting. Derek Reynolds thought he was the king of the world, but he forgot the most important rule of power. Never underestimate the person who holds the foundation of your castle. He mistook Laurel's kindness for weakness, and her silence for submission. In the end, the poor orphan he tried to discard wasn't just his wife. She was the architect of his entire life. When she walked away, she didn't just take the money. She took the reality he thought he owned. It's a brutal lesson in karma. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because they might be the one holding it up. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and justice, please smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. We release new stories of drama, betrayal, and redemption every single week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a twist. What would you have done if you were Laurel? Let us know in the comments below.